I awoke with an unpleasant sensation in my abdomen. One of his hands was on my buttocks, and the other was attempting to gain access to my genital region. I experienced a severe headache, which I knew was not caused by the alcohol we consumed the previous night. "CJ, I do not particularly enjoy mornings," I muttered. "Oh, sorry," he replied, "but what about all those stories you told? I was informed that you and Mark had engaged in sexual intercourse throughout the night and into the following day. I was 20 years of age at the time, and I expressed my disquiet at the suggestion that, when one is in a state of romantic infatuation, one should subsist on sexual intercourse alone." He replied, his demeanor evincing a certain degree of distress, that he appeared to be in a state of emotional distress. I was prompted to question whether I was making an erroneous assumption. It seemed as though everything would be ideal for me, given that I was exchanging a 40-year-old for a 20-year-old. A 20-year-old man who worked all day and then returned home to work on his car for approximately 30 hours per week. The older man, Mark, was devoted to his work and the accumulation of wealth, which he believed would provide for our future. CJ was devoted to me, Mark, although he was not controlling or prone to violence. However, if I asserted my position firmly, he would simply look at me with a peculiar expression. He would smile in a peculiar manner and walk away. It was not anticipated that the situation would unfold in this manner when my mother desired something. My father was expected to fulfill her wishes. Eventually, he came to recognize the adage that a happy wife means a happy life. Mark Clayton would then regard me with a gaze that seemed to convey skepticism and disbelief. If I demanded that he cease all sexual activity, he would simply shrug his shoulders and continue working on his automobile. I was extremely displeased with that vehicle, the Ford Mustang, and I found it particularly peculiar that the lack of sexual intimacy seemed to render him almost incoherent. This was a sentiment that my mother had expressed to me, but a few days after I began to refuse him sexual intercourse, he developed a peculiar habit of looking at it as beneficial that women are typically more intelligent than men, as it allows for greater comprehension of certain situations. I observed a calendar in our kitchen with a large red circle around next weekend. There were also several days leading up to this, including the day that was circled. The significance of this was not immediately apparent until I examined his sock drawer and discovered a brochure for a high-end. The brochure, which was entitled "End Brothel in Las Vegas," featured a photograph of various women on the cover. These women appeared to be offering sexual services for free, and it seemed that they would be willing to kill the author's husband for the opportunity to engage in sexual intercourse for money. The women in the photograph were all quite attractive. The girls were physically fit and relatively young. I was so shocked that I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. What infuriated me the most was that he had already crossed out this day on the calendar, and it was still too early for lunch. I was not foolish and had no intention of allowing him to engage in sexual intercourse with a group of professional prostitutes. I was aware that this would inevitably lead to my being cast aside. In less than 5 seconds, his Mustang reached 60 miles per hour. That night, I requested that he engage in sexual intercourse with him. I was overcome with anger, and ultimately, my feelings were hurt. He denied the request, stating that it was an afterthought and of no consequence. I was certain that steam was emanating from my ears when the tables turned. "Mark, it has already been a week since I have been in the mood." He responded by stating that he could caress my male organ. I smiled in an attempt to appear alluring. However, this was challenging, particularly when my primary aspiration was to bite off his instrument and spit it into the fireplace. I implored him to satisfy me, begging for his attention. "I am uncertain as to the outcome," he said, as if pondering the matter, that I was not particularly adept at this. It appeared as though I was merely attempting to hasten the process. Perhaps within a week, I was overcome with astonishment. This has consistently been the case between us. I attempted to utilize the techniques I had learned from television programs, magazines, and my mother to emerge triumphant, yet Mark consistently managed to gain the upper hand. In contrast, CJ held me in high regard. I was his ideal. All I had to do was say, "Jump," and he was in the air. Why have I not yet left Mark for CJ? There are 2 reasons. First, I have a deep-seated affection for Mark. I dislike his work ethic, his sense of responsibility, and his reluctance to challenge others. Second, there is a more practical reason: CJ, with his intense worship and affectionate gestures. I derive great pleasure from the affectionate gestures he displays towards me, such as kissing my posterior or earning a meager income from working in a bar. He is an enjoyable companion and adheres to my instructions, yet he is incapable of providing me with financial sustenance. Mark, my spouse, earns a six-figure salary, which may explain his behavior. Initially, our relationship was characterized by mutual affection and admiration. Over the course of 2 decades and approximately 1 million disagreements, we have both become increasingly defensive in our interactions. I have been attempting to recall the circumstances that led to the transformation of our enduring love into a state of prolonged longing and, subsequently, intense animosity. CJ's presence was a constant source of contemplation. He initiated a gentle stroking of my legs, aiming to elevate my spirits without provoking my anger. This act, which involved a subtle foot rubbing, consistently elicited a strong sexual response from me. In contrast to Mark's actions, CJ's approach merely irritated me. CJ moved closer to me and caressed my breasts. I informed him in a serious tone, and he immediately rolled up to me. I was disinclined to tell him that his rubbing of my legs was distracting me from my thoughts. Furthermore, my large breasts were as unnatural as my blonde hair after surgery. I observed that I had lost the majority of the sensation in the nipples on my breasts. Mark was consistently adept at eliciting pleasure in this area in a manner that no other individual seemed to be capable of. This was yet another aspect of Mark that I found disagreeable. He was particularly proficient in the realm of sexual intercourse, and his genitalia were unquestionably more sizable than CJ's. Mark consistently induced a state of tremulousness in me, rendering me akin to a puddle of liquid on the floor. It was challenging for me it is difficult to accept that he was unfaithful to me. It is even more challenging to believe that he truly loved me and still does to this day. It will undoubtedly be challenging for him, but that is beneficial because it means I can always return to this if necessary. In fact, I would not have to leave Mark at all if he did not insist on winning every argument and did not allow me to control the situation as I had done previously. It was inevitable that we would have been much happier if I had been in control. I would have been a much happier wife and would have made him the happiest man on the planet. However, he annoyed me too often, which led me to question my role in the relationship. It was actually CJ who made me realize that I was truly in control. He informed me that in a divorce, the woman always gets everything, while the husband ends up living with his mother. Basement eating tuna straight from the can. CJ himself lived with a woman who wanted to marry him, but she wasn't really what he was looking for. They weren't married, so leaving her wouldn't be a problem. That is, if one were to follow the advice of CJ, who suggested that the day of reckoning would be today. He said this between caresses of my breasts. I then remembered the plan we'd been planning for weeks. We were waiting for the perfect moment. The timing of this event was fortuitous, occurring as it did during a week when circumstances aligned in a favorable manner. Mark's absence from town provided an opportunity for CJ and me to act without his immediate knowledge. Neither of us had the courage to confront my husband with the news that I was leaving him and seeking a divorce. The mere thought of doing so made me physically ill. I possess a sense of right and wrong, and I found it reprehensible to contact this man in such a way. He was absent from the marital residence due to business obligations, striving to provide for a domicile, vehicle, attire, jewelry, and sustenance. Mark was entitled to a more considerate approach. It would have been more beneficial to engage in a constructive dialogue with him regarding the state of the marriage and their respective feelings. If it was mutually agreed that the marriage was beyond repair, a comprehensive discussion of all potential alternatives would have been prudent. Subsequently, the option of divorce should be discussed. Following the dissolution of the marriage, both parties will be free to pursue other relationships. This was an appropriate course of action, yet it was not pursued for over 2 decades during the course of our marriage. Mark did not engage in physical violence against me. Furthermore, he did not raise his voice when we could not reach an agreement. He attempted to find a mutually acceptable solution. This was one of the primary challenges in our relationship. He was too accommodating. He was always willing to concede to others, yet if we could not reach an agreement, he would adopt a peculiar grin and depart. Over time, I became adept at interpreting his demeanor. I knew precisely what that expression signified. It conveyed a sense of, you, if you do not consent to a compromise, you will not receive anything. It also conveyed a sense of, who wants to engage in sexual intercourse with a 40-year-old. A year I am of an advanced age, and I have the opportunity to visit Las Vegas. Over the years, I have become increasingly angry. I am at a point in my life where I require a significant change. In the event of a divorce, I will receive everything I am entitled to, my house, my belongings, and the majority of his financial assets. When the time comes for him to retire, I will also receive half of his pension. I have consulted with an attorney and have instructed him to draft the necessary divorce papers. I have discussed the matter I consulted with my mother and discussed the matter with numerous friends. They were unanimous in their confidence that it would work, yet they all advised against pursuing the divorce. What irritated me was that my mother, who had always been hostile towards Mark, advised me that I was insane for even entertaining the idea of divorcing him. However, their opinion only served to anger me further and strengthen my resolve. My lawyer, who was primarily interested in the rationale for the divorce, was financial gain. I intended to report mental abuse and neglect as the basis for the divorce. The justification for this decision was that Mark was absent emotionally while he was working. This was a false and misguided rationale, but it would afford me the freedom and control over my life that I desired. I resented him for being so blind, but the world is a challenging place. He is an adult and will eventually overcome this challenge. Furthermore, if I had taken the time to discuss these issues with him, he might have attempted to negotiate or persuade me otherwise. In some instances, it is necessary to take decisive action to gain someone's attention. I felt like I was in a situation where I had to practice what I had preached. I took a deep breath and I retrieved the telephone and placed a call to CJ, who was once again focusing his attention on my unconscious body. The sounds of trucks could be heard from behind the house, indicating that one of our neighbors had delivered the furniture. I dialed a number that I had learned over the course of many years. The call was answered after one ring and connected in the middle of the second ring. It appeared to be a coincidence. I anticipated that Mark would be the individual who answered the phone. I inquired as to whether there were other individuals who could respond to my calls. He inquired about the purpose of my call. His indifferent demeanor made me feel a slight degree of remorse for my actions. He inquired as to why I was calling him. He spoke in a manner that suggested it was unusual or unexpected for me to contact him. After contemplating this, I realized that he was correct. I had not contacted him in years, except to request something for myself. This man was gainfully employed. He was eager to provide us with a better life, and I had largely ignored him for an extended period. Perhaps what I desired would be beneficial for both of us. I could allow him to retain a modestly larger portion of the income. I did not need to harm him, I simply desired autonomy. I am your wife. I was so close to achieving the ultimate goal and reaching the culmination of my journey, but at the final stage, sweat ran down my forehead and dripped onto the white. The woman beneath me appeared to be an angel, her skin smooth and unblemished. She made a small, high-pitched sound. She emitted a high-pitched sound and pulled my head back towards hers. She pressed my lips tightly to hers and managed to squeeze my male organ even tighter in her velvet vice. "Oh, damn," I breathed. She giggled and kissed me again. "Shannon, baby," I choked. "I can't help myself. I have to." I hissed, "You have to wait a little longer, darling." She pressed herself against me. Against me, I attempted to restrain myself. Shannon had the capacity to propel me to the culmination of our sexual encounter, only to leave me in a state of exhaustion afterwards. It was difficult to comprehend that I had only known her for a mere 3 months. The persistent ringing of my mobile phone prompted me to lose control. I reached the pinnacle of our sexual act in a manner that nearly resulted in my loss of consciousness. I observed Shannon's reaction and noted that she was approaching a state of intense climax. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and her legs were spread. She was out and trembling violently. "Oh, baby, that's so good," she muttered. "I swear to God, that's how it happened." "What the hell are you trying to do to me, Shannon?" I inquired as my phone continued to ring. "I'm trying to make you happy, Mark," she replied, her tone slightly altered. "I've been happy since I met you." "You'd be even happier when we're done," I retorted. "Answer the call." It could be her. This was not the case. These were movers. I forgot that they were supposed to call me when they arrived. Shannon initiated a series of caresses that elicited a renewed sense of excitement. I was abruptly alerted to the presence of an incoming call by the notification on my phone. I identified the number as hers and signaled to Shannon, who was observing me intently. Her eyes, a striking green, displayed a combination of amusement and a malevolent grin as she rolled over and positioned herself alongside me. I was once again struck by the remarkable physical attributes of her body. Her legs, reminiscent of the dancer she once was, and her breasts, which were firm and full, were particularly noteworthy. Her posterior is so voluminous that it appears to be larger than it is, yet her waist is so slender that it appears to be smaller than it is. The combination of these two physical attributes is striking. Shannon has said that God was so pleased with the result of his work on her posterior that he was too busy to give her any breaths. I fell in love again. This was only the second time for me, but this time everything was okay. This love was like the phoenix. Rose from the ashes of what came before her. It seems prudent to begin at the beginning. 3 months ago, I was in a situation that could be described as a state of affairs that was the result of a series of unfortunate circumstances. I was in a romantic relationship with a woman who expressed animosity towards me. It was evident to both of us, but I was still in love with her. I was genuinely in love and foolishly believed that she felt the same way. I was aware of the challenges in my marriage, as we engaged in frequent disagreements. However, I assumed that all married couples experienced similar difficulties. My perspective shifted when my secretary entered my office and informed me that I had a visitor. Shannon entered my office and took a seat. I was perplexed, so I inquired about her company. "I'm one of the individuals seeking retribution against the corporation," she replied. "I don't understand," I said. "I know you don't," she responded. "Mark, it's going to have a significant impact on you." She then stated that my wife was unfaithful. I initially thought I had misheard, but when I looked at her, she seemed so confident that I was convinced she was telling the truth. After being informed that the sky was blue, I was convinced of her veracity. I was overcome with a sense of disbelief, perspiration forming on my forehead, and my heart began to beat rapidly. My vision blurred at the edges, and my eyes began to water. I felt as though I might vomit at any moment. Images of a faceless Manon, causing her to scream with pleasure, dominated my mind. Then, I experienced a sudden release, and the floodgates opened. I placed my head on the table because, as a man, I did not want to display weakness in front of this woman. The woman with red hair began to express concern for my emotional state, noting that I appeared to be crying like a child. Before I had a chance to process this observation, I was enveloped in the scent of fresh cherries. I felt warm hands gently lifting my head from the table, and I was surrounded by a sense of tenderness. I expressed my regret to CED, noting that I had not anticipated this outcome. I anticipated that you would respond in a similar manner to my own reaction upon learning of the situation. I expected you to express anger and engage in physical confrontation with my boyfriend. Instead, she sat on my desk with my head in her lap and stroked my head, attempting to pacify me. She inquired, "Do you love her?" while shaking her head. "Despite her infidelity and lack of positive regard for you, do you still love her? When they are in bed, she only talks about how you argue and how you should do what she wants. I do not understand why you try to support her, as she does not appreciate you or your efforts. Why do you care so much about her?" She continued to stroke my head and talk out loud. The sound of her voice was soothing, and I began to wonder if she was trying to calm me down or if she was just talking to herself. She inquired about his interest in blondes with large breasts, noting that CJ also exhibited a similar fascination. He was taken aback by her question and the sudden surge of emotion. He recalled his feelings towards her before she underwent a hair bleaching procedure. He was perplexed by her remark and the subsequent laughter that followed. He sought clarification, inquiring about the source of her amusement. She responded, emphasizing the truthfulness of her statement. However, she also expressed that her partner, despite his admiration for her, remained unaware of her physical attributes. A significant financial investment was made to achieve the desired appearance. I was incredulous, as the situation seemed surreal. Shannon provided comprehensive details about their encounter, including how they met and N's final plan. They deliberated on potential courses of action, ultimately concluding that the most effective method to eliminate me from N's life while retaining the majority of my assets would be through legal means. Shannon was in a comparable, albeit less ethical, position. She supported CJ from the outset of their relationship, while he engaged in multiple extramarital relationships with women who frequented the bar where he was employed. Subsequently, the individual in question, who had apparently been seeking a blonde with a larger bust, discovered Anne and believed his aspirations had been fulfilled. In addition to the physical attributes, it appeared that Anne also fulfilled a maternal role. Shannon engaged the services of a private investigator to gather as much information as possible about CJ. She also spoke with the individual's agent, a woman named Sarah Price, and subsequently accepted compensation for her assistance. It is notable that having this information did not benefit Shannon. Sarah, another attractive woman with red hair, explained this to Shannon on multiple occasions, as they were not married. The information was of no consequence to her. CJ was legally able to leave Shannon at will, without any repercussions. In contrast, I could leverage Sarah's data and recordings to reinforce my stance in the divorce proceedings and reduce the financial compensation I would have to provide to Anne and her partner over the course of the monitoring. As time passed, Shannon and I grew closer. This eventually led to a conversation in which I informed her that she was too good for him. I advised her to simply leave him. However, she replied that she could not do so without paying. I then suggested that she should not allow anyone to step over her. Nevertheless, I asked her whether it was not enough that she had discovered his true nature. From the perspective of physical harm, you are not attached to him, so you are not constrained in the same way I was. I inquired, you are young and attractive. You have time to find someone who will love you the way you deserve. Her green eyes lit up even in the dark interior of my Mustang, indicating that you finally noticed. She asked, noticed? She then inquired as to whether I had noticed her. I replied in the affirmative, stating that I had noticed her as soon as she had entered my office. I then proceeded to make a rather bold statement, which she found amusing. I had observed that she was so enamored of and that she had failed to notice that I was a woman, let alone that I might have been interested in her. Her laughter, as was her custom, had a certain charm for me. That was one of the things I found appealing about her. The majority of my reasons for remaining in this situation are as follows. I terminated my relationship with CJ several weeks ago. I believe that assisting you in seeking retribution against these two individuals is of greater importance to me than exacting revenge against the aforementioned individual. I am strongly opposed to the idea of you having to support these two individuals for the remainder of their lives. There must be a way for us to extricate ourselves from this situation. She approached me directly, initiated physical contact in the form of a hug and a kiss, which I found surprising but ultimately appealing. At the age of 40 and with 2 decades of marital experience, I considered myself to have a firm understanding of the nuances of kissing. However, the kiss from Shannon was markedly different from what I was accustomed to. The taste was distinct, the sensation was unique, and the entire experience was unlike anything I had previously encountered. The experience was markedly different. I was unable to cease kissing her. After a period of time, we ceased listening to the audio recording of our cheating partners. A voice behind us finally separated us, but Shannon was reluctant to relinquish my hand. I was gratified by this turn of events. I had hoped that this would occur. Sarah smiled and commented, "You two are so adorable. You are much more compatible with each other than with the individuals you are currently involved with. Given that you are now in a relationship, it would be prudent to simply ignore the scammers. Such individuals will eventually face the consequences of their actions. However, there are still outstanding issues, such as his divorce and our desire for revenge." Sarah then proceeded to elucidate several aspects of the law. She then posed the question, "Do you want to be together enough to do this?" In the following weeks, Shannon and I devoted our time to honing our acting abilities. We informed our respective partners of our increased workload, and it is noteworthy that neither of them suspected the truth, that is, that Shannon and I were acquainted and, moreover, that we were engaged in a nascent romantic relationship. This afforded us the chance to spend considerable time together, during which our mutual attraction intensified. One day, I contacted Shannon via telephone at her place of employment and informed her that I was prepared to dedicate more time to her. I conveyed to her that we were in each other's company on a near-nightly basis. She responded with a light-hearted chuckle, indicating that she felt this was insufficient. I then clarified that we had not yet engaged in sexual intercourse. She informed me that she was working and did not want anyone else to overhear. I expressed my confidence that our sexual encounter would be exceptional. I told her that she was mistaken. She knew that I did not possess the same physical attributes as her wife. I asked her what difference that would make. She stated that the most fulfilling aspect of sexual intimacy is when one is in a loving and mutually satisfying relationship. She was visibly emotional, her voice trembling slightly. It was as if she had been waiting to hear this from me. I reciprocated her feelings and expressed my love for her. I told her that she could have any part of me she desired at any time. She responded with the words, "I'm yours." I was taken aback, as no one, not even Anne, had ever expressed her love for me with such eloquence and passion. I had never told anyone anything like that. Prior to our encounter, she solemnly stated, even that, CJ. I was not concerned about it, however, and instead inquired about the feasibility of our plan. We are following Sarah's strategy, and the phone call that morning was precisely what we had anticipated. Interestingly, I believe that fate played a role in bringing us together for several weeks while we made our plans. We were cautious not to be seen together, but individuals we both knew approached us and informed us that our loved ones were unfaithful. We were compelled to expend significant effort to maintain the pretense of ignorance. The situation was increasingly reminiscent of a Shakespearean comedy of errors. It appeared that only CJ and Anne were aware of our knowledge, due to the scammers' conviction that they were more astute than others. My business trip, which was a ruse, finally commenced. While it was not genuine, it proved effective, and fortuitously, Shannon's mother fell ill concurrently. The fact that we were both ostensibly absent provided the scammers with a sense of impunity. Consequently, the anticipated phone call did not occur as anticipated. Both Shannon and I had predicted that the call would come on Friday night. I had arranged for the truck to arrive on Sunday morning to allow the couple some time to enjoy each other's company before the situation became untenable. However, Shannon and I were enjoying the moment of victory when I answered the call. Mark asked the voice of the woman with whom I had been married for more than 20 years who else could answer my phone. I responded joyfully. Shannon came over and embraced me, providing me with strength. I had not anticipated this turn of events. "Why are you calling me?" I inquired. "I am your wife," she replied. "Mark, I have something important to tell you. I anticipate that you will not be pleased. The most straightforward approach would be to inform you that, in the long run, this will be beneficial for both of us." It may not seem that way at present, but I began to laugh, and he joined in. I was astonished that he was laughing at me. CJ proceeded downstairs to ascertain the situation with the trucks. I had assumed they were in my yard. I regret that CJ was not present at that time. "Why are you laughing?" I inquired. "I am speaking in earnest. Recently, an individual informed me that I would put them on the shelf. They spoke in a jovial manner, which I found particularly irksome. In a short while, they will experience a reversal of fortune. I was resolved to gain the upper hand, but I must inform you that I have some news for you." He continued, "And you will soon discover what it is. Then, you will understand to dine alone." I was uncertain as to the meaning of this statement. I did not believe it was a spontaneous idea on his part. He laughed and stated that this was CJ's plan. He claimed to have heard people discussing it, possibly my neighbors, who were quite observant. I felt the need to take action to protect myself. "No, I have decided to proceed with the divorce. Mark, I am leaving you. I have stated my intention to divorce you on numerous occasions." However, my words seemed to have no impact on him. "Even the letter you wrote to me prompted me to question my decision, but I believe you felt justified in your actions." I was compelled to rectify the situation. His words caused me considerable distress. Was this individual psychic? Nobody was aware of the letter, even CJ. I had written the letter to Mark. It was intended to be presented with the divorce papers. It outlined my feelings about our marriage and the areas where we had fallen short. It also provided a detailed account of the actions Mark would need to take to win my affections back from CJ. "Mark, we need to discuss this," I muttered. "When you return home, we should address this matter. Do not forget, my dear, that when you..." He gazed at the sky and observed, "You can see the stars and still not see the light." I inquired about his dietary habits. I contacted the individual in question to inform him of my decision to terminate the relationship. He feigned happiness about my departure, seemingly to unsettle me. "Mark, if you don't make any changes, and we will proceed with the dissolution of our marriage." "It is too late for that, my love," he replied. The pain is excruciating. In the background, I heard a woman's voice murmuring something about how she was the only woman he should call. It is never too late, I said. Why is it too late, Mark, and who is that woman next to you? I have already departed, he sang, and I felt stronger. I sang this victory song, ooh oh, oh my God, oh oh ooh. What do you mean you have already departed? I screamed into the phone. Suddenly, the feeling I had been experiencing all morning intensified. I had a feeling of dread that must have been caused by how El Coyote feels just before he drops the rock. He drops it on the Roadrunner, which begins to loom over his own head. I listened to the phone to hear Mark's answer, but all I heard were beeps. All that could be heard was a series of beeps. The phone was thrown onto the bed in a haphazard manner, and just as CJ entered the room, his expression was one of sheer terror. He instructed me to get dressed and proceed downstairs. I donned a robe and secured it in a manner that ensured my breasts remained in place. A large African-American woman was standing in my living room with a tablet, giving the impression that she was in control of the situation. I inquired as to her identity. She demanded that I leave the premises. She then turned her back to me, as if assessing me. I was in a benevolent mood. I am aware that your circumstances have resulted in feelings of anger and resentment. However, I must reiterate that I will not tolerate any displays of rudeness or delays to my schedule. I am required to vacate this residence by the end of the day, and I intend to do so in a manner that is consistent with the benevolence I have demonstrated thus far. I will allow you a few minutes to gather your personal belongings, but I will not be leaving the premises. I have made it clear that this house belongs to me and my husband, and we have nearly completed the necessary payments. CJ has contacted the authorities, and I believe this will facilitate a more expedient resolution. The outstanding balance on this property is minimal. It is fully paid, so this will probably be the most embarrassing moment of your life. I stared at her as CJ took out his phone and dialed 911. A few moments, which seemed like an eternity to me, passed, giving me the opportunity to think. I considered what Mark had said. What victory was he claiming? Hank K., the police chief and a personal friend of Mark, and I arrived on the scene. The woman walked past me and handed Hank a stack of papers. He looked over them and nodded his head several times. Subsequently, he approached me. He glanced past me to CJ, and inquired, "Is he the individual you had an extramarital affair with?" I was taken aback by his boldness. I asked him to clarify his question. He responded, "I'm merely wondering if this is the man you cheated on Mark with." I was astonished by his audacity. I had forgotten that Mark had sold the house. My mind was reeling from his words. Before I could process what he had just said, a woman who was more than cheerful pushed her way through the moving crew. She asked, "Is he?" She walked slowly around CJ and then smiled at me. "They said you were foolish, but I had to see it for myself." "For my part, I am at a loss as to what you are referring to," I said. "I have observed that a considerable number of women in this town are perplexed by the decision you made to exchange your husband for a man who is less endowed in that particular area and who lacks the financial resources to support himself." She smiled and replied, "There may be some truth to the hypothesis that the introduction of silicone into the breasts can have a deleterious effect on the cognitive abilities of the individual." The police chief approached CJ and inquired, "Do you know what a woman says to a man with a particularly large penis?" "No, I'm not aware of that," CJ replied, perplexed. "Well, you'll be surprised to hear that I know," the chief replied, and he and the woman with a larger physique began to laugh. "We can continue," the woman with the larger physique said, wiping away tears of laughter. "Very well," said the chief. "Pack your belongings and leave. Mark sold the house, but he cannot be compelled to do so." I protested, "This is my home. I chose him, but he paid for it." And interjected, "The chief, Mark purchased it with his own money. His name is the only one on the document, so he has the right to do whatever he wants with it." "A divorce," I interjected. "Not always," the chief replied. "Furthermore, you are not getting divorced." "I'm going to apply tomorrow," I stated. "However, you should have applied last week, as that is when he sold the house." The boss emitted a chuckle. "Is this illegal?" I inquired. "Not entirely," the chief responded. "It is somewhat unethical, though." It is akin to engaging in sexual intercourse with a minor while one spouse is away at work, thereby generating income to procure the aforementioned items. However, it is not deemed illicit. I then requested that CJ contact my legal counsel, stating that I needed to contact the financial institution and our investment firm. She then proceeded to remove various items of furniture. From the residence, to which location are they removing my furniture? I inquired. Your husband donated the furniture to a local charity auction house, she replied. However, it can always be purchased back, she added. I selected each piece of the furniture, arranged it, and began to set up. Perhaps you should have paid for that, Tina giggled. Oh yes, I forgot, hair bleach interferes, she added. Given the aforementioned circumstances, I chose to ignore her and instead focus on the phone call to the bank. Carly, this is Ann Clayton. I am Mark's wife. Carly, my lawyer will be calling you very soon to freeze all of our accounts. Therefore, I need to withdraw the money before then. She spoke to me in her extremely cheerful voice on the phone. Carly, I will address the matter of maintaining the house and paying expenses at a later time. I require sufficient funds to do so. Additionally, I must ascertain whether the frozen accounts include only the current account assets or if Mark can transfer his direct deposit to another account. She stated that she believed Mark had already transferred his direct deposit the previous week, when he terminated his employment. I inquired, expressing my dismay. Carly, I intend to withdraw all funds from our accounts and transfer them to a new account. Do you intend to do the same? She asked. Absolutely, I replied. It is likely that I will be able to secure alternative employment more expeditiously than Tina can consume a bucket of chicken wings. However, this financial resource represents my sole source of income until the court approves the dissolution of marriage. I am obliged to issue a check for the specified amount, which you are then required to deposit into your new account. I understand. Please proceed with the necessary action. Upon your arrival, I shall provide you with a check for the sum of $311, which you may then utilize. What, pray tell, are you attempting to convey, Carly? I bellowed. There is nearly $500,000 in this account. She began, I am aware of the precise amount. I hissed that this is precisely what occurred last week. Chief, this is surely illicit. I said it is not illegal. He responded, it is, however, a rather unfavorable situation. Indeed, he continued. The bank has a minimum balance rule. If your account balance drops below $50, you will be charged a fee of $10. You do not have sufficient funds remaining to even cover the commission. CJ then handed me the phone, and I began speaking with my lawyer in a rapid, emotional mixture of words and sobs. I informed him of Mark's decision to sell the house and withdraw all funds from our bank accounts. During this conversation, I accessed our investment account and discovered that Mark had liquidated all of our investments. He retained only one share in the cheese company, a prudent move, according to my lawyer. This series of events raises significant legal concerns. Until the divorce is filed, he is legally entitled to dispose of his assets at his discretion. He has therefore taken control of all his assets. It is likely that he will transfer the funds to offshore accounts that are not accessible to me. His intention is to increase his capital to such an extent that, in the event of a divorce, I will receive nothing. Should he appear in court with no money and no job, it is likely that the two of you will simply go your separate ways without any strings attached. It is unlikely that HEK will attend. I previously stated that I believe he has left town. It seems likely that he left me before I was able to leave him. His current whereabouts are unknown. My lawyer inquired as to how I would proceed. If you are unsure of his whereabouts, you may file the necessary documents to initiate the divorce proceedings. However, it is important to note that in this state, abandonment proceedings can take up to 3 years to conclude. Do you have the financial resources to sustain yourself for that length of time? He responded by stating that if you have no money, you cannot pursue the divorce. I was compelled to pay the sum requested, which I did by clicking on the appropriate button. However, I could only hear beeps, and in addition to this, I was subjected to the sound of the movers giggling at me in a low voice. This was the beginning of a series of unfortunate events that led to my current situation. I made the decision to temporarily move in with my mother. Mark was meticulous in his actions. He sold or gave away all of our assets, including all 3 cars. He drove both of his Mustangs and the Jeep. He drove during the winter, and we were gone. He retained possession of my new Lexus, but I was unable to meet the associated costs and it was soon returned. I engaged the services of several pro bono attorneys, who all advised me that I should be angry with him for his actions. The majority of the attorneys, when presented with the relevant facts, concurred that his actions were both brilliant and entirely legal. There is no legal obligation for a man to reside with his wife solely on the basis of their marital status. Similarly, there is no legal prohibition against selling a property that has been titled in one's name. Mark was entitled to withdraw funds from our joint accounts, given that he was the primary account holder. He had reclaimed his financial independence. I attempted to contact him, but his number was no longer in service. This seemed to indicate that he had left me a voicemail, which I failed to discern. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with no communication from him. I lost CJ before the first month was over. He was struggling to pay rent. He subsequently discovered a letter from his girlfriend, in which she informed him that she had terminated their relationship and was now involved with another man. This turn of events was particularly striking, given that Mark had only recently ended our own relationship. One day, while listening to the radio, I suddenly became overwhelmed with emotion and began to weep. The music that was playing was by a band I had only heard of vaguely, called the Eagles. One of their songs, Already Gone, seemed to mirror the circumstances of my own life. The lead singer, Glenn Frey, sang a song called Already Gone, which told a story strikingly similar to my own life experience. The statements and actions Mark exhibited on the day of his departure were strikingly similar to lyrics from this song. My life was characterized by a relentless pursuit of hard work, with 6 days of work per week. Cleaning hotel rooms with my mother, I was struck by the similarities between my life before and after my marriage. Prior to my marriage, I had been accustomed to a lifestyle of relative ease and comfort, taking the luxuries of my life for granted. After just a few days of working just to survive, however, I began to regret the way I had treated my husband. I was forced to confront the realization that I had been unkind and selfish in my treatment of him. I was spending more on makeup than my current salary in 2 weeks. Additionally, I was aware that my prospects were limited at the age of 43. The only unusual aspect of my situation was that, after 3 years of poor nutrition and strenuous work, I had gained a few pounds. I also ceased coloring my hair. One day, upon returning home, I discovered an invitation awaiting me the next day. I was invited to a local cafe, the invitation unsigned, but I was aware that it was from Mark. It suddenly became clear why Mark could have drained our accounts, but he left a considerable amount of money, $311. It has been 3 years, 1 month, and 1 week since he left me. That is the extent of my sentence, the conclusion of my repentance. I am overwhelmed. In retrospect, I recognize the potential benefits of pursuing a healthier lifestyle and reclaiming my physical health. At that moment, I came to understand that Mark's affection was unconditional, regardless of my physical appearance. While I was striving to present myself in the best possible light, I was suddenly struck by a realization. I distinctly recalled the final line of the song that Mark had quoted to me. Prior to his departure and before I could initiate divorce proceedings, the lyrics of a song he had quoted to me came to mind. It happens so often that we live in chains that we don't even know we have the key. The invitation I received seemed to convey a similar message, indicating that we had reached a point of reconciliation. I interpreted this as an indication that he was prepared to rekindle our relationship. I realized that I had been misguided. I had assumed that I was in control of the situation, but in reality, I was merely a passive observer. I spent each day in a state of passive acceptance, while Mark consistently demonstrated his dedication and commitment to meeting my requests. The only instance in which he exhibited reluctance was when I attempted to impose my will upon him and force him to do something he did not desire. Upon attempting to initiate a divorce, I was met with resistance. As was his custom, he acquiesced to my requests. He then proceeded to take his leave. What was peculiar, however, was that I had spent the previous 3 years anticipating the inevitable. I was convinced that the dissolution of our marriage was imminent, yet the divorce papers never arrived. I was now reasonably certain of the reason for Mark's continued affection for me. I was eagerly anticipating our next encounter. Upon arriving at the bar, I noticed a bartender with a disheveled appearance and a ruddy complexion, a telltale sign of alcohol dependency. He approached my table and, in a rather blunt manner, stated, "You've gained a significant amount of weight. How many donuts have you consumed in the past 3 years? Have you imbibed a sufficient quantity of alcohol to the extent that you have forgotten the dimensions of your genitalia? What are you doing here, CJ?" "I still work here," he replied. He stated that he had come to drink in order to gain courage. "This is a rather remarkable coincidence," he said. I informed him that the inscription on the invitation read, "We have come full circle. I am prepared to fulfill your desires." He then stated that our situations were distinct. The invitation also posed a question: why does a squirrel hide its nuts in its nest? I was uncertain about the significance of this inquiry. He then proposed that the phrase might signify Shannon's desire for my return. The English refer to women as birds, and this is Shannon's way of indicating that she does not want me to be involved with other women. I believe that they collaborated and decided to reunite us after a specific period of time. They wanted us to endure suffering and be willing to accept their terms, regardless of the circumstances. I was enraged by this. I would be remiss to not acknowledge that I had learned a great deal over the past 3 years. However, if Mark wishes to rekindle our relationship, he will have to demonstrate a willingness to engage in lengthy and respectful discourse. I departed the bar with a renewed sense of determination and proceeded to cross the street to the cafe. I took a seat at a small table and surveyed my surroundings. I was surprised to observe CJ enter the cafe and take a seat at a small table on the sidewalk next to mine. 2 college students were engaged in a game of hacky sack. Upon CJ's arrival, I contemplated his riddle and realized that he was incorrect. I gestured at him, but he was too preoccupied with the other individuals. He then observed me, waved, and shook his head, but I was unable to decipher his message. The individuals adjacent to him lost control of the small bag, which flew towards CJ. Subsequently, he knocked over his glass. He then stood up angrily just as a small bag fell off the table and landed in front of him. One of the other men approached and appeared to be attempting to kick the bag back into the air in order to restart the game. However, he swung his leg wildly and missed the bag. At least the bag was not damaged. His foot then flew into CJ's crotch with the intensity of CJ's scream was such that it could have been heard from a considerable distance. I proceeded to assist him, arriving just as the waiters attempted to offer their assistance. However, they were reluctant to examine the injury, preferring to simply help him regain his footing. I reached him just as the ambulance was preparing to transport him to the hospital. CJ then turned to me and stated, "Your answer was wrong." He groaned through a veil of pain. She did not want me to return. I informed him that this situation was unrelated to birds. The squirrel's nuts are not reproductive organs, they are simply nuts. He grumbled and began to speak, but was interrupted by the appearance of a girl who resembled a college student. She was tall and fair-haired. Her hair was auburn, her natural color, and her breasts were nearly as large as mine, moving in a way that suggested they were real. She was holding a briefcase and chewing gum. "Are you Anna Clayton?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, irritated. She handed me a stack of papers. "What is it?" I asked. "His list of demands," she replied. "Why don't you ask him yourself? You've been served." I looked around the cafe and saw him suddenly. I also understood the phrase, riddle full circle, indicated that I had obtained what I desired, yet this did not imply that I had regained Mark's affections. In fact, I had divorced him. However, I found myself nostalgic for the life I had once known, which I had lost. Moreover, I had become accustomed to a limited financial status. Primarily, I desired to reunite with Mark. Then, I observed him. He appeared attractive, even more so than when we had separated. He seemed happy, but he was not alone. Accompanying him was a woman. She was. The woman had red hair and appeared to be young and very beautiful. She was visibly pregnant, and between them, they were holding the hand of a young girl. The girl was a perfect combination of her mother's and her father's features. She had the same color hair as her father and the same green eyes as her mother. The girl, who was very small, looked at me with the same strange little smile that her father had. It was possible that this was genetic, or perhaps she had some understanding of what was going on. I immediately recognized that the relationship was irremediable. There was no possibility of reuniting with Mark emotionally. He was emotionally detached and unresponsive. It was futile to attempt to regain his affection. The redhead was determined to maintain her relationship with him. She had given him her heart, her love, and her body. The divorce papers revealed that Mark was seeking retribution against me. I intended to utilize the court system to claim my husband's assets. I needed financial resources from this man, even after his departure. However, I did not receive either of these outcomes. Mark initiated the divorce proceedings, citing abandonment. This indicates that he retained his financial resources and continued to enjoy the benefits of his former life. I lifted my gaze from the documents to regard the man I had lost, but it was too late. He had already departed, leaving me with only tears. Subscribe to our channel to avoid infidelity and proceed with the next narrative, which is more compelling than this one. Individuals under the age of 18 should refrain from listening to the subsequent account.